With 9 months already in the books for this year of Melee, we're getting very close to having to decide what the final rankings are going to look like after this roller coaster of a ranking period. And with all the action that has happened since the summer ranking, I thought we should take a look at what the top 15 currently looks like before we head into the fourth quarter of Melee. Let's start with the top 6, which has progressively become more and more difficult to rank as the year has gone on. Before we take a brief look at each of their years, let's take a look at their head-to-head records against each other. Looking at these records, especially when we bring in the colors to distinguish between winning, tied, and losing records, we can see 3 tiers of players starting to emerge. First, we have the contenders for the number 1 spot. Hungrybox, Armada, and Leffen, who all have one losing record against the other players at the top of the table. Then we have Muta King and Plup below them, who have a lot more players that they wouldn't want to see on their road to grand finals, but they've still been able to take first place this year in spite of this. And finally at the bottom we have Mango, who does not have a single winning record against the top 6, and who some think could even be ranked 7th, but we'll have that debate a little bit later. For now, let's go tier by tier and briefly look at each player's year so that we can rank them amongst their tiers. First off, we have 2017 and the summer of 2018's best player, Hungrybox, who has been struggling a bit lately. With a 4th at EVO, a 3rd at SmashCon, and a 2nd at Shine, Hungrybox wasn't able to take a gold medal in August while dropping 2 sets to Zane and losing to Muta King for the first time this year. But he still racked up an amazing back catalog of 10 first place finishes at non-locals while never placing lower than 4th all year. And with easily his biggest demon, Armada, announcing his retirement, the end of 2018 is looking like the perfect time for Hungrybox to finally take his first super major win this year. Next up we have Armada, who will very realistically still finish in the top 4 by the end of the year, even with his retirement. He's been as consistent as always this year, with his worst performance being 4th at Genesis, losing to Plup and Leffen, who finished 1st and 3rd respectively. However, the biggest thing that distinguishes him from the rest of the top 6 is that he's the only one to boast a head-to-head winning record against Hungrybox. That, coupled with 2 first place finishes at majors, makes him a real contender for the number 1 spot. And lastly in this section, we have the EVO champion Leffen. His losing record against HBox completes the rock paper scissors dynamic that exists between the top 3, with Hungrybox beating Leffen, Leffen beating Armada, and Armada beating Hungrybox. Leffen has been nearly as consistent and inactive as his fellow Swede by having his lowest finishes being at 3rd place this year, besides his 5th at Summit losing to Muta King and Hungrybox. But now that one of his best head-to-heads in the top 6 will be gone for the rest of the year, Leffen moving forward is going to be forced to solidify his records against the other 4, especially Hungrybox, if he wants to make a stronger case for him being the best Melee player in the world. So then how would I order these 3? As I've said before, they're all so close, and I'd honestly agree with any ordering of these 3. But for me, it's Hungrybox at 1, Armada at 2, and Leffen at 3. Hungrybox has definitely been relatively slumping a bit lately, while the other 2 have been overperforming their expectations, but when we look at just how many tournaments Hungrybox has won this year, he deserves the number 1 spot for me, despite the fact that he hasn't won a super major yet. And during the process of making this list, I've swapped Leffen and Armada at least 3 or 4 times because of how similar the years have been, but the ability to beat the best player in the world, plus SmashCon and Smash and Splash, is more valuable in my eyes than EVO and Valhalla. And with the top 3 sorted out, let's move down to the next tier to talk about Plup and Muta King. It's felt like everyone's been waiting all year for Plup to match his Genesis 5 performance, but he just hasn't been able to replicate it since. He's won smaller events since then like Aegis and DreamHack Austin, but he just hasn't been able to push past Hungrybox, and more recently Leffen and Armada, to take home first place. He's got the consistency to match and even surpass some of the top 3, but consistency alone isn't what determines a player's ranking. And facing off with him for the 4th spot on this list is Muta King, who had arguably the biggest win of his illustrious career this year at Summit 6. Much like Plup and his big victory, the rest of Muta King's year has also fallen flat. It's important to note that his loss to Lucky may be a bit of a misnomer because of reports of his controller being broken for that set, but the same cannot be said for his losses to Rishi, Axe, and Amsa. For me, Plup easily takes the spot above Muta King, both because I wouldn't be scared to see that he has to face off with Army or Axe, but also because he's got slightly better records against the top 6 than Muta King. I don't think by any means that either of these players are locked into these spots for the rest of the year, and I think both could hypothetically finish the year at number 1 with a flawless final 3 months. With those 5 out of the way, let's quickly rehash the debate we had about a month ago after Zane won Shine of Mango versus Wizrobe versus Zane. You can go watch that entire video for a more comprehensive look at the debate, but for the purposes of this video, we're just going to look at an updated list of their head-to-heads against the top 6 and their sheets of wins and losses. The records against the top 6 haven't changed at all in the last month due to a lack of events, so here's a quick summary. Although Mango doesn't have any winning records, he's proven that he can beat almost everyone in the top 6 this year, with him being 3-2 against Muta King in the last 5 sets as well. Zane and Wizrobe have both proven they can beat at least 2 members of the top 6 this year, but haven't taken sets off of all of them. And of active members of the top 6, Zane only has Muta King left to beat in the Marth Ditto, which is quite a tall order, and Wizrobe has yet to beat Mango or Plups Sheik. As for wins and losses, we've only had the update Zane section of the graph from the Roast of Hugo by adding in another win against both of the CLG boys and 2 losses to S2J, which reinforces the idea that Zane may have issues with the Falcon matchup. So again, the chart is almost exactly similar, so we'll make this quick. Mango is much more consistent than your perception of him would have you to believe, only suffering 2 losses outside the top 10. Wizrobe has proven that he can consistently beat almost every player in the 8 to 30 range, but sometimes has issues in the Falcon Ditto. And Zane is lacking wins against players in the 7 to 10 range and has a much deeper depth of losses than the other 2, but also has attended many more tournaments. And it shouldn't be surprising to anyone that my ranking order of Mango, Wizrobe, and Zane hasn't changed over the last month. Mango's ability to be a potential threat to the top 6 is huge, and helps cover his lack of first place finishes this year. And although Zane has had better peaks than Wizrobe, his litany of losses and handful of matchups he hasn't proven himself in yet leads me to give the 7th place nod to Wizrobe. Moving on to finish the top 10, let's compare the years of the usual suspects for these spots: Axe, Amsa, and SFAT. Although SFAT does have some good wins from the 7 to 20 category, he's immediately thrown out of the contention for me because of his lack of a top 6 win alongside his depth of bad losses relative to his rank. Amsa and Axe both have 2 top 6 wins, but a win over Hungrybox holds much more value than a win over Leffen in my eyes. Moving down to 7 to 20, they both have similar quality of wins in these categories, with Amsa having a greater quantity largely in part to Axe's recent inactivity. Then in the last grouping, Axe clearly has much worse losses than Amsa. With all of this in mind, it should be no surprise to have me placing Amsa at 9th and Axe at 10th to finish off my top 10. And here is where the list starts getting a bit more interesting. There are many contenders for this top 15 spot, but we're going to focus on comparing these players in threes. Let's logically start with 11, 12, and 13 from the summer ranking. With SFAT's recent struggles, namely his 33rd placing at SmashCon losing to Jerry in 42nd, his claim over the 11th spot isn't as strong as you would expect. And actually, as of right now, I'd give the 11th spot to S2J for being more consistent while having better records against the 7 to 10 range than the Fox main who used to be a staple of the top 10. SFAT still has had a very solid year and is almost guaranteed to make top 32 at the very least at any tournament he enters, so he's close behind S2J at 12. It would make sense to bring Lucky and Hugs here to compete with Crush for this next spot, but both of these players have had a shaky last couple of months, especially Hugs, so instead let's put in Pew Pew, who has an immaculate set of wins and losses for this year, besides his loss to Faust. I'd say his record is actually very comparable to Crush's, with Pew Pew having a bit more losses in the 11 to 20 range, but I think Pew Pew's greater attendances should be rewarded, which is why I'm putting these two in at 13th and 14th. So now in this 15th and final spot for this video, we've got a lot of players with great peaks but sketchy consistency to choose from. The 3 names that bubble up to the top for me are Lucky, who has wins over Muta King and Zane, Army, who has wins over Mango and Axe, and Swedish Delight, whose peak includes Armada, Zane, and Axe. Lucky is probably the most consistent of the bunch, but I have to give 15 to the man who is one of the exclusive 6 people who can say they've taken a set off of Armada this year. And that about does it for this video. As always, I'm excited to see you guys debate my list and put together your own list down in the comments below. And remember to keep in mind with this list, I'm going for if the year ended right now where I would rank everyone, so it doesn't lean heavily on recency like a seeding list would for this top 15. If you're looking for something more like that, tune into the special edition of the Melee Stats podcast next Tuesday night, where we will be revealing the Melee Stats third quarter PR, which focuses a whole lot more on recency. The last iteration of the MSPR was used to seed Summit 6, so I'd say if you're interested in the current seeding landscape, keep your eyes peeled for it. And I think that's about all I've got. I've been SaveAsUntitled, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time.